Good evening. My name is Mariana Garcia, and I did my literature review over Grandparents, Parenting Round 2. Theories that were relevant to my research was continuity theory, which is when people throughout their age maintain the same activities, behaviors, and connections that they did when they were younger. Also, disengagement theory, which is when people become idle or stagnant and do not keep up with the relationships and activities that they usually do. They usually become recluses or stop going out and doing things that they love doing. Activity theory is the opposite of this theory of disengagement, and these people are more likely to stay active and keep up with their social interactions. For my research, grandparents are becoming parents all over again and raising their grandchildren, and this is on a rise right now. Instead of them spending time with them as grandparents should and just giving them back to their parents, they're keeping their grandkids and raising them sometimes with and without the parents. A study in Africa over 12 women who were parenting their grandchildren expressed that they were exhausted, they felt really helpless, and they were constantly worried about their grandchildren. Some of them said that their children were in the picture, others had died because of disease, but the ones who were still around or alive wouldn't help with money, would give money away to other people, and they felt not angry, but they felt like it was their job to help with their kids because the money that they were given, which was the equivalent to our retirement system, was never enough to help raise their several grandchildren, because many of the women were raising more than one grandchild. Some would raise anywhere from 3 to 5. They were in constant worry about their grandchildren, and if they would tell them you need to be here, they wouldn't show up, they wouldn't come back. They would either be doing drugs or alcohol or stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So then they would have to send out other grandchildren to go find the troubled grandchild, which kept to constant worry. They also said that they weren't able to move around as much, which did not help when it came to disciplining their grandchildren. The one quote that stuck out the most to me was when a grandmother said she couldn't catch a child and they knew that they wouldn't be caught by her when she would try to discipline them. So they would maneuver themselves to make sure that they wouldn't be caught, to a point where she would just get so helpless and exhausted that she would just throw something at them. The one thing that kept them going was their faith and being able to draw on other people who would help them even when those other people didn't have anything to help them with. Some challenges and strengths in America are guilt and shame. Roughly 2.4 million grandparents and other family members are raising over 6 million relative children. Some grandparents reported that they weren't being active, they weren't able to fulfill their dreams and ambitions of retirement because they were constantly having to take care of their grandchildren. They were always having to chase them and make sure they were going to school on time, making sure their grades were right. And one of the things that did help them was if they were doing well in school, then they knew they were doing a good job raising their grandchildren. Some reported that they felt healthier and great because their grandchildren kept them going through continuity theory, which they kept doing what they were used to doing. And as they kept raising kids, it helped them stay young by staying active, versus the ones who felt depressed and started to feel resentment towards their children for abandoning their own children. Others felt shame and guilt because they were ashamed of their children for abandoning their grandkids and ashamed of them for doing drugs and picking drugs and things over their own children. They felt that they didn't raise their own kids correctly and worried about raising their grandchildren correctly. Others felt guilty because they allowed their children to abuse their grandchildren. And one lady said she felt the most shame and guilt because her grandchild had been abused for a long time and she never did anything about it until the state finally took him away and awarded him to his grandmother. Reasons for the rise in grandparents raising grandchildren and their ramifications are placing children with their family members was way cheaper for the state versus having to pay somebody to take care of them in foster care. Another public policy initiative was incentives for adopting. So if now you get a tax break for adopting, or if you get help when you adopt a child, or if you're helping them in foster care. Another thing with public policy that didn't help and made it more difficult for food was TANF. You have to have you have to meet certain qualifications. You have to have proof of income. You have to meet qualifications and bring in paperwork that most elderly don't want to deal with. And another part of shame, they don't want to go in and get the help. A lot of them are also below poverty because their retirement pay isn't enough to help raise a family. They barely make it alone without children, and now they have their grandchildren that they also have to pay for. Grandparents raising grandchildren. One of the articles I looked up named the grandparents GRGs, and a GRG is someone who is a grandparent and they have full custody parental rights. These GRGs are high risk of poverty because they don't have the money they need. They live off of very low incomes, and then when you add the grandchildren, it makes their pay go even thinner. 36% of the grandparents who were raising their grandchildren, were because of drugs. Another 21% was because their parents were incarcerated. The biggest thing I found with my research was there was a lack of research. There is a huge growing population. 2.4 million is a lot of grandparents, and we don't know what's going on with them completely. There's no breakdown of how it works on a Hispanic family and how it works on a Native American family or a Caucasian non-Hispanic family. There's also a lack of research on the effects it has on the relationships between the grandparents and the grandchildren. Some examples of people I've seen would be a lady I worked with at church. She raised her granddaughter and she had a medical issue, but when she was ready to retire, her granddaughter moved back in with her, and she is now raising her great-grandchild, and she's unable to now completely become retired because she's afraid if she retires she won't be able to take care of no one will be able to take care of her great-grandchild. Another example is my grandmother, who constantly worries, like the ladies from Africa who constantly worried about their great-grandchildren. Only my grandmother is worrying about her great-grandchild and takes care of him when she's 75 years old because she worries about them. The grandparents who are raising their grandchildren are missing out on retirement and the luxuries of retirement. They don't get to relax. They don't get to do what we typically think a retiree should be doing. Thank you.